At the end of December 2021, an underwater volcano with a rather exotic name, Hunga Tonga, woke up after several years of sleeping. It did that with so much energy and strength that people heard the eruption from over 100 miles away. Then it went back to sleep. But a couple of weeks later, it woke up again with a force 7 times greater than the first time. It broke the island above it in 2 parts. The lightning storm that started because of the eruption was the most intense in recorded history. The sound waves from the eruption traveled around the planet several times. Someone even heard a loud boom from it in Alaska. And it started the first known mega tsunami since ancient times. This tsunami took the lives of 2 people as far as Peru and caused trouble for 2 fishermen in California. But that's not all. This eruption could change the weather patterns on Earth for years. You may see the first proof in the summer of 2024, which is forecast to become much wetter than usual. Scientists believe the eruption was caused by gas building up to a critical point. Different minerals, including anhydrite quartz and sulfides, were building up for several months until they blocked the flow paths and sealed the gas within Hunga Tonga. Normally, when a volcano erupts, the fumes cause a temporary cooling effect on Earth's surface. But Hunga Tonga's eruption was different. It didn't produce much fumes, but released a massive amount of water vapor, roughly equal to 60,000 Olympic swimming pools. The intense heat of the eruption turned huge amounts of seawater into steam, which then blasted high into the atmosphere. All that water vapor ended up in the stratosphere, a layer of the atmosphere that's too dry to form clouds or rain. Scientists don't have any observations of volcanic eruptions like Hunga Tonga to predict its effects on our weather patterns. They can't tell exactly how long these effects might last either. This is because the only way to measure stratospheric water vapor is with satellites, which have only been around since 1979, and there hasn't been an eruption similar to Hunga Tonga in that time. Experts from different countries started analyzing satellite data right after the Hunga Tonga eruption. They wanted to find out how long water vapor would stay in the stratosphere, where it would go, and, most importantly, what this would mean for the planet. The first big result of the eruption, at least partially, was a huge hole in the stratosphere that was hanging on for several months in 2023. By the time it appeared, the water vapor had reached the polar stratosphere over Antarctica. In the following years, there wouldn't be enough water vapor left to enlarge this hole. It looks like Hunga Tonga will have just a minimal effect on global average temperatures. But there are some surprising, lasting regional impacts. One of the scientific models forecasts colder and wetter winters for northern Australia until about 2029. In North America, it predicts warmer winters, and Scandinavia could have even colder winters. This is just one study though, and one approach to understanding how the eruption of Hunga Tonga can change our weather. We do have at least one example from history when a volcano eruption changed the world. Over 2 centuries ago, in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted and caused the year without a summer. In the following year, the winter was unusually cold and wet weather across Europe and North America. A recent study confirms that 1816 wouldn't have been this cold without the volcanic eruption. The immediate effects of the eruption were catastrophic, with tsunamis destroying homes, claiming 10,000 lives, and 80,000 more who fell ill in the aftermath. The eruption of Mount Tambora was one of the strongest in the last 1,000 years. It had ejected an enormous amount of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, which quickly spread across the world. It resulted in the coldest year in at least the last 250 years. In May, frost wiped out most of the crops in New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. By June, heavy snow covered the ground in Albany, New York, and Dennisville, Maine, and New Jersey had 5 straight nights of frost. The cold continued into late summer, which should have been the harvest season. In July, lakes and rivers were still frozen as far south as northwestern Pennsylvania, and frost stayed in Virginia until late August. Temperatures would drop from above normal summer highs to near freezing within just a few hours. The weather was completely unpredictable. Prices of food skyrocketed. The cost of oats for horses, which were the main mode of transportation, also rose sharply. Some people believe this situation inspired Carl Drees to invent the bicycle in 1817 as an alternative transportation method. Tambora changed weather patterns completely for not just 1, but 3 years. The whole planet got colder, and as crops failed, probably at least 1 million people starved. Scientists don't have solid evidence of volcano eruptions that have taken more lives than Tambora. But the Krakatoa eruption in Indonesia in 1883 is far more famous than Tambora because information about it spread worldwide via telegrams and photos. Its final blast was the loudest recorded sound in history, and people could hear it on 10% of the entire Earth's surface. The eruption started a tsunami with waves about half as tall as the Statue of Liberty. Still, it was less powerful than Tambora's eruption. The island that once hosted Krakatoa disappeared in the eruption, but new eruptions began less than 50 years later and created the Child of Krakatau cone in the center of the caldera of the old eruption. The new volcano still comes to life from time to time. Mount Vesuvius's eruption, which took down Pompeii, is one of the most well-known volcanic disasters in history. It took around 2,000 lives, much fewer than Tambora. According to a famous Roman author of that time, the eruption lasted 18 hours. Pompeii was covered by a layer of ash and pumice that was thicker than twice an average human height. The nearby coastline also changed dramatically. In today's world, the after effects of volcanic eruptions are often more dangerous than the eruption themselves. Thanks to advances in technology, we can now predict volcanic eruptions more accurately and use safety measures like evacuations and flight cancellations. But there's still a lot of risk that changes in weather patterns and drought all over the world, especially in areas like India, East Asia, and East Africa that are affected by monsoons. Volcano eruptions can also have effects you wouldn't probably expect, like the evolution of dinosaurs. These guys were once the size of cats, waiting for their time to shine. It came around 230 million years ago. This time is known as the Carnian pluvial episode. Before it, Pangaea was a dry and arid supercontinent. But then, there were 4 major volcanic events that pumped huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Global temperatures and humidity spiked because of it. These massive eruptions most likely happened because of the Wrangellia Large Igneous Province eruption in what is now British Columbia and Alaska. This prolonged volcanic activity created the right conditions for dinosaurs to blossom and diversify, and also for the rise of other groups, like modern conifers, ferns, crocodiles, turtles, insects, and early mammals. With higher temperatures and more rainfall, terrestrial plants have evolved, and humidity-loving ones have become dominant. Without those changes in the world, we could have a completely different natural history. There's some solid proof that volcanic activity has really changed the weather patterns back then. Scientists have found layers in the Earth's core that show different types of carbon. It means there were 4 massive releases of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The data on mercury and carbon together shows that the spike in mercury levels was thanks to a major volcanic event that affected the global carbon cycle, and not just local eruptions.
Now, the next time you travel the world on Google Maps, check out this lake in Finland that is shaped just like the country itself. This lake was modified by humans in the north of the country and is an exact model of the country on a 1 to 10,000 scale. In the 1980s, Arctic tourism and skiing above the Arctic Circle was booming. A local company decided to build a hotel and plenty of holiday cabins here. The pond, shaped like Finland, was supposed to bring more tourists to the area. They managed to finish it in just 1 week with 2 excavators, a tape measure, and a few sticks. And I must say, they did a great job. If you don't like long elevators, head to Hanover, Germany. One of the outdoor elevators there only travels for a few inches, and the whole experience takes a few seconds. It has become a real star on social media after some tourists posted footage of it, so you might have to wait in line to enjoy your short ride. In case you're wondering what's the point of this elevator, well, it's installed at the local train station. Every inch counts when you're traveling with heavy luggage or have limited mobility, so it's a good way to navigate within the station. Gummy bear fans, you might want to know that your favorite chewy treat has enough energy in it to start a fire show. If you drop one gummy bear into an ignition tube with a small amount of molten potassium or sodium chlorate in it, it will quickly disappear in a ball of fire with an impressive fume cloud. First, potassium chlorate melts. Then the melted potassium chlorate breaks down and releases oxygen. The sugar in the gummy bear burns quickly, turning into carbon dioxide and water, which gives off a lot of energy. After everything cools down, you can look at what's left. The black stuff is unburned carbon, the white solid is potassium chloride, and the caramel-looking stuff is partially burned sugar. So we only have 6 muscles in our outer ear, and cats have an impressive 32. That's why they can rotate their ears 180 degrees and use them to show their current mood. If you see the ears are upright and facing forward, you have one happy cat. If the ears are rotated to the sides, sort of like airplane wings, or angled backward, your kitty must be really stressed or afraid of something. Ears held low or rotated to the sides could be a sign the cat is sick, so watch out for those. A stray dog in Brazil got a job as a professional car consultant at a local Hyundai dealership. The company manager noticed a stray pup next to the dealership and started leaving food and water for his new friend. Other staff members also fell in love with the pup and finally decided to adopt him. The doggy got a home, a job, and the name Tucson, after Hyundai's popular compact SUV. Tucson's job includes wearing a tie, getting behind the wheel, and winning over the hearts of customers. You can see from the company's social media that he excels at all these tasks. In Mexico, they like to spice up mango and citrus fruits with salt and chili pepper. You can try mango with a shrimp taste in the Philippines and salted watermelon in the southern states. When you're eating a sweet fruit sprinkled with salt, you'll notice the salty flavor with the first bite, and the sweet fruity taste follows a bit later. And when you get used to it, it feels as juicy and amazing as ever. It's most likely because salt affects the sweet taste receptor for sugar, and then the real magic happens on a molecular level. You can try and put salt on any fruit you like, but the effect will be different. Salt can make sweeter fruits like cherries and strawberries even sweeter and balance the flavor of grapefruit, pineapple, and watermelon. Now back in 1956, long before the first dating apps were a thing, or apps in general, a Swedish sailor named Ake Viking decided to ask the sea for help to find a soulmate. He put a short message to someone beautiful and far away in a bottle and let it travel the world. 2 years later, he received a reply from a girl named Paulina from Sicily. She wrote that she wasn't really beautiful, but she thought it was super cool that the bottle had covered such a huge distance. That's why she decided to let the sender know she had found it. Well, they became pen pals, and after a while, you guessed it, Viking moved to Sicily to marry his one and only Paulina. That unique pattern on your fingertips stays with you for your entire life. If you happen to damage your fingerprints somehow, or develop some skin condition that can change them, they'll still grow back within a month. As you grow older, the skin on your fingertips becomes less elastic and the ridges get thicker, but the pattern still doesn't change. It just becomes harder to scan. If you work as a bricklayer, though, or have to handle certain chemicals, you might lose some details in your beautiful natural pattern. But no worries, once you stop doing those activities, you'll get your fingertips back. Unless maybe you're a meat cutter. If you still believe in the 5-second rule, there's some bad news for you. When your food hits the floor, it instantly becomes a bacteria magnet. Researchers discovered that moisture, surface type, and contact time all play a role in how badly contaminated your food will get. Food with high moisture levels, like juicy watermelon, are more likely to get in trouble fast. In a different study, researchers swabbed the floors around the University of Illinois in a lab, hall, dormitory, and cafeteria to see how many organisms they could find. Even on dry, sterile surfaces, germs relocated onto cookies and gummy bears in less than 5 seconds. For some foods, it took less than 1 second for the transfer to begin. The first Barbie doll was made in 1959, but her great-great-great-grandmother comes from ancient Rome. Archaeologists found some incredible sarcophagi during construction work in Rome in the 19th century. One of those had a 9-inch-long doll next to its owner. The head and body were made from a single piece of ivory. Its arms and legs were separate and connected with a clever nail mechanism, allowing them to move. Its face was so detailed that it looked like a tiny portrait. The doll even wore a tiny gold ring with a key on its finger and had a small ivory box full of jewels, tiny mirrors, bone combs, and the remnants of accessories. But Ken was nowhere to be found. In case you're looking for a new job and you love to cuddle, there might be an opening for you. As weird as it sounds, a professional snuggler is a real job. There are several companies that provide cuddling services and look for staff members who are ready to give hugs and snuggles and listen and support people who really need it. Now, anyone can give hugs to others, but you need to be trained in professional cuddling to make money out of it. You will need to learn to set boundaries with your future clients without hurting their feelings and to mentally care for others without giving away too much of your own personality. Famous scientist Nikola Tesla knew that the whole world would go wireless back in 1900. He mentioned that devices no larger than a watch would be able to transfer signals precisely. Back then, it was a revolutionary idea the scientist got while conducting experiments at one of his labs. Tesla was so confident about the success of his idea that he even convinced famous banker J.P. Morgan to invest money in his project. The World Wireless System involved a tower shaped like a mushroom on the shores of Long Island. It was supposed to transmit messages, phone calls, and images to ships across the Atlantic Ocean. Sadly, because of financial issues, the tower was never finished. Oh well, it all turned out now, didn't it? A tsunami hitting major cities on or near the Mediterranean Sea and in the northeastern part of the Atlantic Ocean is not a matter of if, but when. It is scary and surreal to think that places like Cannes or Barcelona could suddenly get slammed by a huge wave. But the fact is, European coastlines are in active tectonic areas. Only about 10% of all tsunamis worldwide happen in the Mediterranean, and there have been at least 290 tsunamis in this area since 1600 before Common Era. Despite the relatively low number, this phenomenon has caused numerous devastating disasters throughout Europe's history. Back in 1755, an estimated 8.5 magnitude earthquake with an epicenter southwest of Cape St. Vincent triggered a tsunami that destroyed most of Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. About 40 minutes after the earthquake, this massive wave just slammed into the harbor in downtown, racing up the Tagus River. The phenomenon was so fast that several people on horseback had to gallop to higher ground to avoid getting carried away. And this was just the beginning of a nightmare, with 2 more terrifying waves hitting Lisbon right after. A disaster like this is similar to what we see in the Pacific Ocean several times a century, but in the Atlantic, it's very rare. This type of major tsunami is expected to happen every 3 to 5 centuries, but now it could happen tomorrow. Marseille in France, Chipion in Spain, and other cities are on the list of important locations that could be flooded soon, with a roughly 100% chance of being hit by a tsunami in the next 30 years. Statistics show that the wave will probably be more than 3 feet high. I know, it doesn't sound like much, especially since when we think about tsunamis, we imagine terrifyingly tall waves, like the one that hit Lituya Bay in Alaska. In that case, the wave was over 1,700 feet tall. But we must remember that even waves only 19 inches high can be dangerous to swimmers, because it's not the height of the tsunami that matters, but also the flow and movement of the water. Not to mention the flooding, which can damage beaches, harbors, and streets. If the coastline has a small harbor and the waterfront is exceptionally low, like Cannes, this natural disaster might be much more dangerous. Tsunamis around 6 feet high can lift cars off the ground, while smaller waves can create walls of water traveling at 40 miles per hour. Plus, there are these smaller events that might not wreck everything, but still can cost a ton of money. For example, large sandbars that move around on the ocean floor, like sand dunes shifting in deserts. They can mess up pipelines or deep-sea cables for internet and communications. and that ends up costing businesses and governments millions of dollars. That's why organizations like UNESCO are worried about the possibility of a dangerous tsunami hitting Europe soon. So they're doing everything they can to prevent apocalyptic scenarios, like what happened in 2004 when an earthquake off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, caused waves over 100 feet high in coastal communities, resulting in over 200,000 lives lost. And let's not forget about 2011, when an earthquake off the coast of Tohoku, Japan, triggered a tsunami that reached about 6 miles inland and caused a major nuclear accident at a power station along the coast. Over 16,000 people lost their lives in that tragedy, and the event resulted in billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. These disasters were huge wake-up calls, and we've come a long way since 2004. We're much safer today, largely because the tsunami warning system is highly effective at quickly detecting this dangerous situation. Unlike many other natural phenomena, a tsunami can be anticipated. We may only have a few minutes to act, but if we all know what to do, many lives can be saved. And in most parts of the world, sirens are commonly used to alert people to tsunamis. To sound the siren as early as possible, initial tsunami alerts usually rely only on seismic data. First, specialists receive information about an earthquake. Seismic waves travel about 100 times faster than tsunamis, so they have enough time to analyze the data and see if the earthquake might have generated a tsunami and whether they should issue an initial tsunami alert. At U.S. warning centers, for example, scientists typically issue initial alerts within 5 minutes of an earthquake. If a tsunami is suspected, these alerts may also include information about wave arrival times, recommended actions, and potential impacts. But sounding the alarm is not enough. To save lives, coastal communities also need to be trained to respond fast and in the best way possible. That's why UNESCO produced this program called Tsunami Ready, aiming to train people living in coastal areas at risk on how to act in case of a tsunami event by the year 2030. The idea is to help communities stay safe by teaching them how to protect their livelihoods and safeguard their homes. Being recognized as Tsunami Ready by UNESCO doesn't mean a community is tsunami-proof, of course. It's more like a recognition that they have adopted all possible measures to mitigate tsunami risks. So authorities are helping communities to prepare themselves by installing evacuation signs, establishing security procedures, and creating plans to warn tourists. Like Spain, which distributed tsunami warning signs along the entire coastline, as well as signs showing evacuation routes to higher ground. And Spain better be prepared. I mean, only 7 tsunamis have hit the country since the year 365, so it's difficult to predict the effects of such an event. But they could be devastating, considering that Spanish coastal areas are so economically important. There's also a danger zone in the Averroes Fault, beneath the Barents Sea. If an earthquake happens at this point, people will have only 21 minutes to escape a tsunami. UNESCO has also established 12 tsunami warning centers, which cover Europe as well. This initiative involves 5 centers located in the Mediterranean and Northeast Atlantic regions. These centers can save thousands of lives because they monitor ocean disturbances 24/7. Then, after analyzing the threat, they send out messages based on the event's potential to cause a tsunami. The intensity scale ranges from no effect to completely devastating. And by that, they understand that nearly all brick buildings could be demolished by waves, and even the most reinforced concrete structures could suffer heavy damage. Now, so far, we have mostly talked about tsunamis caused by earthquakes along converging tectonic plate boundaries. In fact, earthquakes have accounted for over 80% of tsunamis since 1900. But tsunamis can also result from landslides, volcanic eruptions, and even meteorite impacts. Experts are also worried that with the current changes in climate, we might see more of Meteo tsunamis popping up in the Mediterranean. These ones are triggered by freaky weather conditions and can mess with any coastline that's got a shallow seafloor. They might not be as huge or famous as the earthquakes ones, but they can still cause significant property damage and put people in danger. For instance, in 2006, a Meteo tsunami struck the harbor of Ciutadella on the Spanish island of Menorca. Yachts were tossed into each other and later stranded on the harbor floor as the water receded, resulting in tens of millions of euros in damage. Unfortunately, Meteo tsunamis in the Mediterranean tend to be stronger during summer, so if you're planning to spend your vacation in Europe, stay alert for any signs of dangerous waves. If you suddenly encounter a tsunami moving in your direction, remember this is the time to react. Move to higher ground as far inland as possible. Pay special attention to any emergency alerts and information, and follow the guidance of local authorities. Most importantly, do not wait around taking photos. Leave the area as soon as you notice any signs of this danger event, or if you hear an official tsunami warning. Hey, stay safe. So, you want to get as close to the moon as possible without leaving Earth? Easy. Hop on a plane to Ecuador and climb Mount Chimborazo. I know, it may sound weird, but hear me out. Now, Everest is the tallest mountain when you're measuring from sea level, but Chimborazo's peak is actually the closest spot on Earth to the moon. Here's the physics behind it. Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet tall, and Chimborazo is only around 20,000 feet. But the secret lies in how far they are from the Earth's core. You see, Earth is not a perfect sphere. It's chubby in the middle and slightly squished at the top and the bottom. The chubby part in the middle is called the equator. FYI, the country Ecuador actually translates to equator in Spanish. Now you know. The mountain we're talking about, Chimborazo, is located a few degrees from the equator line. So since the squishy sphere is chubbier in the middle part, Chimborazo's peak sticks out farther into space. This means that if you hike all the way up to this mountain's peak, you'll be a smidge closer to the moon than if you hike all the way up Mount Everest. In the North Sea, off the coast of England, there's a tiny platform bobbing around, roughly the size of 2 tennis courts. You might think it's an oil platform, but this is Sealand, the world's tiniest country. The Ruff's Tower platform was built during the first half of the 20th century as a fort to protect English ships. Jump to the 1960s when a guy named Paddy Roy Bates decided to claim this old fort as his own country, naming it the Principality of Sealand. Paddy gave his country everything it deserved: a national flag, currency, a constitution, stamps, and a hoisting swing system. That's how you get into the country, by the way, hoisted all the way up to the upper part of the platform. Today, this micronation is headed by ruling monarch Michael Bates, who is a member of the country's self-proclaimed royalty. I know, right? Why wait in line for the British throne? The nation has its own fan club, who cheer for the country's national soccer club. Their team competes in international tournaments where they usually play with other tiny nations. Although Sealand only has one official resident as of right now, players from other countries join to help out their soccer team. One of the country's supporters also placed a Sealand flag on top of Mount Everest. Having your kitchen in one country and your living room in another, well, this is the daily reality for some locals in Barle. In this town, the border between Belgium and the Netherlands doesn't just run along streets, it slices right through buildings. So, to navigate this setup, a rule was made that a house's nationality is determined where its front door is located. But this solution created its own problems. There's a house where the front door is exactly on the border, giving it 2 addresses, one in Belgium and one in the Netherlands. The owners of this house were given a unique opportunity. They could choose which country they'd like to get their utilities from, like gas and water. And you guessed it, they picked the country where the stuff was cheaper, in this case, Belgium. Down in Senegal, Africa, there's a lake that looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. About 18 miles north of the capital, Dakar, you'll find Lake Retba, also known as La Rosa. This lake is famous for its bright pink water. Yes, it really is pink, and you can even take a swim if you're up for it. But be prepared, the water is super salty, one of the saltiest lakes in the world with salt levels over 40%. The pink color comes from a species of tiny algae. These algae produce red pigments that reflect sunlight, giving the lake its unique shade. If you want to see the lake at its brightest pink, visit during the dry season from November to June. The rainwater during other times of the year can wash away some of the color. Oh, by the way, there are other pink lakes around the world, like Lake Hillier in Western Australia and Lake Natron in Tanzania. So there's a hill that seems to be on fire all the time. Located in the Arctic region of Canada, the Smoking Hills are a truly unique sight on Earth. Some of the minerals found here are so rare that they've only been spotted on Mars. For at least a couple of hundred years, the ground here has been smoking continuously. At first, explorers thought this was due to an active volcano, but it turns out the smoke comes from something else. The soil in the Smoking Hills contains sulfur and coal, and when these materials mix with oxygen, they can spontaneously catch fire and keep on burning. But don't get any adventurous ideas about visiting. The environment here is extremely harsh, there's toxic smoke, and the temperatures can be dangerously high. So, I'd try Orlando. New Zealand is famous for its stunning landscapes, but it also has a hidden treasure underground. Deep in some caves in the country's North Island, you can find a mesmerizing natural wonder. To see it, you'll need to go down about 150 feet in a series of dark, twisting caves. As you go deeper, you'll enter complete darkness until you reach the cave ceilings, which are lined with tiny glowing creatures. These are New Zealand's native glowworms, which are the larvae of a special type of fungus gnat found only in this country. They shine a bright blue light to attract prey. If you get a chance to tour these caves, it feels like floating through a galaxy, with thousands of these living stars sparkling above and their glow reflecting in the water beneath your boat. It's an incredible sight, like stepping into a magical glowing world. Mexico is home to one of the most amazing caves in the world, called the Cave of Crystals. If you think you've seen big crystals before, wait until you see these. In around 1910, miners in the town of Nica, Chihuahua, like the dog, discovered a cave full of clear selenite crystals. But it wasn't until 90 years later that they found an even more incredible cave filled with enormous crystals, some as long as 39 feet and weighing up to 55 tons. Scientists believe that 26 million years ago, give or take, hot, mineral-rich water filled this cave, allowing these huge crystals to grow. The Nica crystals are thought to be the biggest in the world, making people standing next to them look teeny in comparison. However, exploring the cave isn't easy. Inside, temperatures reach 136 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with protection, people can only stay inside for 20 to 30 minutes. It's an extraordinary place, but not exactly a comfortable one for humans. Mauritius is famous for its beautiful beaches and clear blue waters. But it also has a stunning optical illusion at its southwest corner that looks like an underwater waterfall. Even though it seems like water is flowing down into the ocean, what you're actually seeing is a trick of the light and the seafloor. The island is on an ocean shelf that's only about 500 feet deep, but just beyond the edge, it drops down to 2.5 miles deep. This drop creates the illusion of a waterfall as currents push sand and particles over the edge, making it look like water is cascading down. So, while it's not a real underwater waterfall, it's definitely a cool sight to see from a boat. Now here's a place that might either give you chills or leave you in awe, depending on when you visit. Near the small town of Grafino in Poland, there's a forest of pine trees with a strange twist. They're all bent at their bases. During the day, these trees with their sharp 90-degree curves look fascinating and even a bit whimsical. You might even find a comfortable spot to sit on if you're having a picnic. But visit the crooked forest at night, and it takes on a whole different vibe. A thin layer of fog hangs around, making the forest look eerie and a bit spooky. Plus, scientists still don't know why for sure the trees are bent like this. So, would you prefer to see it in the bright light of day or the mysterious dark of night? Ooh.
Salt makes our chips and popcorn taste yummy, but it turns out that's not all. It's used in household and industrial products, from cosmetics to fertilizers, from water treatment to road gridding. All over the globe, around 300 tons of salt are produced every year. But there's a problem. That's too much salt for our planet. You see, salt rises to Earth's surface from deep oceanic rocks gradually, and this process is quite balanced, or it used to be. Humans are pushing this balance out of whack. Our demand keeps increasing, and we're releasing too much salt into the soil, air, and sea. And if this process continues unchecked, we might face an existential threat. Yep, it's as serious as that, and a recent study conducted by the University of Maryland confirms this. There is this thing called the natural salt cycle. It's existed for thousands of years. Salt naturally rises to our planet's surface via geologic uplift and rock weathering. Sometime later, rocks break down and release salt ions into the soil. Some of these ions are absorbed by plants and organisms. Others are washed away into rivers, which transport them into oceans. Salt also gets into the atmosphere. It happens through salt dust in dry regions and sea spray in coastal areas. It's crucial for humans because our bodies need salt, just like animals and plants do. Simply put, we're electrical systems controlled by salts. Soil needs salt because otherwise it won't clump together. Plants also need small amounts of salt since those allow them to have proper metabolism and synthesize enough chlorophyll. At the same time, too much salt isn't a great thing. And nowadays, human activity is messing with the natural salt cycle, bringing salt to the planet's surface much more quickly than before. That's the conclusion researchers made after combining data from different sources, including the U.S. Geological Survey's Mineral Yearbook and global records of river compositions and salinity measurements. The main factor bringing about these changes is salt mining for food and other products. Then there are also acid rains. Those increase the rate of rock weathering. These and other factors speed up the generation of salt at the surface of our planet. At the moment, the concentration of salt in the world is too high. The soil, plants, and animals can't use all of it. Even worse, some essential species can't survive with all this extra salt. Their demise changes biodiversity and can lead to the appearance of invasive species, such as phragmites. Those are tall, reedy plants taking over coastal areas. Then, there's also zooplankton, an important ocean species regulating algae. It's extremely sensitive to salt. If this species starts to decline, it might mess with the world's food webs. Too much salt also turns farmlands into wastelands. Recent reports have shown that around 833 hectares of land are already affected. And that's the area around 4 times the size of India. In some countries, huge areas become infertile because of oversalination. Plus, excess salt is bad for our health. The thing is, all that extra salt gets into groundwater, making it too salty for human consumption. It's particularly bad for people with sodium-restricted diets. And I'm not only talking about table salt or sodium chloride. No, other calcium and magnesium-based salts are seeping out too, usually from the production of fertilizers and building materials. It's like a chemical cocktail of different salts coming from various sources, and scientists don't know yet the effects such a cocktail can have on us humans and our health. So, maybe now you're sitting and thinking, oh, it's time to cut back on my salt intake. Perhaps, but don't cut it all out. In the 1930s, Dr. Robert McCants from Cambridge University's Department of Experimental Medicine found 4 volunteers and asked them to go 10 days completely without salt. First, they had to sweat out the salt that still remained in their bodies, and after that, the scientists literally desalinated everything they were allowed to eat and drink. Soon after, the participants started to experience weird sensations. They realized that they didn't taste much flavor in anything they consumed. It got worse. Fatigue set in, and the volunteers soon got too tired to even eat. They began to show the signs of hyponatremia. It occurs when the concentration of sodium in your blood is dangerously low. And that's when a person's blood cells swell because there's not enough salt in the blood to regulate how much water a cell should and will consume. If this condition is left untreated, it can not only result in seizures, but also have much, much worse consequences. At the end of the trial period, participants got some salty foods, and miraculously, within a few minutes, they could taste again, and their energy seemed to be replenished almost immediately. Honestly, it sounds kinda terrifying. If that's what a mere 10 days without salt are, imagine what catastrophe it would be if salt just ceased to exist. We wouldn't be able to last long, that's for sure. And it would be a never-ending drama, not only for us, but for plants and animals too. They need salt as much as we do. If our oceans suddenly lost all the salt, it would wipe out all underwater algae, cutting photosynthesis on Earth almost in half. Land-based plants would follow suit. So, soon after the disappearance of salt, we'd face a huge issue. Too much carbon dioxide and not nearly enough oxygen. Our climate would start fluctuating between extremely hot and cold temperatures, and hurricanes would become insanely powerful and super destructive. Luckily, we still have salt at our stores, and the natural salt cycle might get more or less stable again. By the way, humanity has known of and appreciated salt for many centuries. For example, it was used as offerings and to preserve mummies in ancient Egypt. It was a valuable commodity traded between the Phoenicians and their Mediterranean empire. In ancient China, people knew of more than 40 types of salt and used it for medicinal purposes. In medieval continental Europe, Venice gained power through its salt monopoly. The production and transportation of salt led to the appearance of new cities and the construction of roads. Salzburg, the city of salt in Austria, is a great example of that. Even these days, salt continues to surprise us. For example, recently, researchers from the University of Miami Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science have discovered rare deep-sea brine pools in the Gulf of Aqaba. That's a northern extension of the Red Sea. Those salty underwater lakes are likely to hold secrets about the way oceans on Earth formed all those millions of years ago. They might also give us some clues to life on other planets. Brine pools are some of the most extreme environments on Earth. And still, despite their ultra-high salinity, somewhat exotic chemistry, and total lack of oxygen, they're teeming with life. Researchers have even found bioactive molecules with potential anti-cancer properties in brine pool microbes in the Red Sea. These super salty zero-oxygen brine pools are located close to the coast and might preserve information on tsunamis, earthquakes, and flash floods that took place in the Gulf of Aqaba thousands of years ago. Salt has even made its way into space. Well, kind of. You see, the moon is like a comet soaring through the cosmos. Our natural satellite is followed by a slender tail consisting of irradiated matter, and our planet passes directly through this tail once a month. Well, according to a study published in the journal JGR Planets, this lunar tail is made of millions of sodium atoms. And as you already know, the chemical formula of salt is sodium chloride. Those atoms get blasted out of the lunar soil by meteor strikes and then pushed thousands of miles downstream by solar radiation. For several days a month, when the new moon is located between Earth and the Sun, the gravity of our planet drags that sodium tail into a long beam, which wraps around our planet's atmosphere. The tail itself is harmless and invisible to the unaided eye. But during those new moon days, high-powered telescopes can detect the faint orange glow of sodium in the sky. Humans are at the top of the food chain, but despite this, some creatures cause us a lot of trouble, and we can't do anything about them. Look at these flies with red eyes and blue-green bodies. These are some farmers' worst nightmare in the United States of America. Meet the New World screwworm flies. These little troublemakers have been munching on livestock from Florida to California for centuries, racking up some serious damage to the agricultural scene. To combat these pesky flies, the U.S. Department of Agriculture dropped a whopping 15 million sterile screwworm larvae from helicopters along the Panama-Colombia border. There's even a factory in Panama cranking out these sterile larvae like it's factory-fresh fruit. This action sounds weird, but it makes a lot of sense. The thing is, female flies only get one shot at mating in their entire lives. So if they happen to mate with a sterile dude, that's it. No offspring, ever. This clever trick means healthy screwworms can't reproduce when surrounded by sterile pals, which keeps their numbers in check. But how do we make these male flies sterile in the first place? Simple. A little radiation zap does the trick. You throw a bunch of flies in a lab, give them a quick spin through an X-ray machine, and then drop them from a helicopter into the wild, where their relatives are hanging out. If screwworms start making a comeback, inspectors hop on ATVs and cruise thousands of miles to hunt down any infected animals and stop the spread. There's no magic trick to wipe out these parasites completely, but the game plan is clear. Keep the sterile fly drops coming and stay one step ahead of these pesky little critters. Do you know why it's too dangerous to move animals from one habitat to another? There's a possibility that they won't encounter predators in the new area and will become an invasive species that will provoke an ecological disaster. Here's a simple example. In the 30s in the 20th century, farmers from Australia faced a serious problem. Cane beetles were spoiling sugarcane in the northern part of the country. Insects devoured a huge amount of the harvest, and people couldn't stop it. They didn't want to spoil the cane with poisonous pesticides, so they brought a group of cane toads from South America in the hope that the toads would eat the pests. But when these toads found themselves in the reed fields, they couldn't reach the bugs, as they lived on tall reeds. The toads just couldn't jump at such height and get the pests. So instead of beetles, they began to eat other insects. Amphibians started multiplying at a tremendous rate. The female cane toad can lay about 30,000 eggs at a time. After 3 days, small tadpoles hatch from the eggs. They swim in the water for 20 weeks and then turn into grown-up toads that live from 5 to 10 years. Millions of jumping animals began taking over the entire northern part of the continent, destroying all the biodiversity around. Leaves, grass, insects, carrion. Toads ate all this and didn't leave food for other animals. The problem was that the toads turned out to be very hardy creatures. Heat, cold, rain, droughts, they can breed anywhere and nothing can stop them. But what about other animals? Australia is full of alligators, big birds, and other creatures that would love to feast on croaking amphibians. Yes, it's true. But any animal that tried to eat these toads didn't survive. The problem is that cane toads are venomous. There are special glands behind their eyes that produce strong toxins that cause serious health problems in any animal. Some farmers saw birds falling from the sky after they had swallowed these amphibians. More than 80 years have passed since farmers brought 100 cane toads to Australia. Now, there are about 1.5 billion of them. They have already covered 386,000 square miles, which is about the same area as the states of Texas and Oklahoma combined. And so far, scientists and biologists haven't come up with an effective way to deal with them. People tried to catch them, but it was useless. Even if you catch 98 toads out of 100 next to a small pond, the 2 remaining toads can produce 30,000 eggs per night. Nature may be able to restore balance when some animals with immunity to toad toxins appear in Australia. But at the moment, cane toads are unstoppable. How can we stop the uncontrolled population of mosquitoes that are dangerous to humans? The correct answer is to create 735 million genetically modified mosquitoes and mix these 2 groups. All over the world, many species of mosquitoes carry infections that cause serious health problems to humans. Almost no one likes mosquitoes. These buzzing insects prevent us from sleeping, and their bites are incredibly itchy. Many people would probably be happy if these creatures disappeared from the face of the earth. And scientists might have found a way to make this wish come true. Only female mosquitoes bite us because they need food to produce eggs. So, scientists released genetically modified male mosquitoes with a special protein in their bodies. After 2 mosquitoes come into contact, this protein is transmitted from the male to the female and then prevents it from producing offspring. All this happens before the age when females begin to bite. So, females can't create offspring, which means they don't need to bite people and animals anymore. And the more of such proteins scientists spread, the smaller the mosquito population will be. It sounds good, but about 240,000 people have signed a petition to cancel this experiment. Many scientists believe that the disappearance of one insect species can lead to a biological catastrophe. Nature is a complex, balanced system where the slightest change can lead to serious problems. Mosquitoes are a food source for many reptiles and amphibians. The extinction of mosquitoes can trigger the disappearance of many species. It's like a chain reaction of catastrophes, the end of which is unknown. Nevertheless, modified mosquitoes have already been released in Florida, and it seems that nothing terrible has happened. The good news is that people have fewer health problems after that. Moreover, since 2019, about 1.5 billion mosquitoes have been released worldwide. It has saved millions of lives and hasn't disrupted the delicate balance of nature yet. Recently, scientists have released another group of safe mosquitoes in East Africa. Well, let's hope that scientists have everything under control. Invasive species are not always mosquitoes, flies, or amphibians. These can also be large animals, such as feral pigs or super pigs. These pigs are a mix of domestic swine and wild boar. There are already almost 7 million feral hogs in the south of the USA. Thanks to people's efforts, these animals haven't spread to the north yet. But the danger to the northern states comes from Canada. Pigs were brought there in the 80s to support agriculture. But in the early 2000s, wild boars lost their popularity. They just stayed in the wild, and farmers were sure that those animals wouldn't survive the harsh Canadian winter. Oh, how wrong they were. Wild pigs turned out to be hardy, mobile, and capable of rapid reproduction. These animals dig and tear up the ground, eat almost everything they come across, and thus take food from other animals. By the way, other creatures can become their lunch too. Wild pigs attack mice, geese, ducks, and some species of deer. They trample crops, grass, and flowers and are not afraid of anything. They're like natural bulldozers. Any farm is in danger of extinction if it's in the path of thousands of super pigs. And people can't do anything with them. The northern states understand that an invasion is imminent, so they're preparing for a long battle. Super pigs love swampy areas with tall grass. Canadian and American farmers will try to drive them into more open areas and fence those places off. The plan is not perfect, but it can slow the pigs down and save some time.
Hey now, get ready to dive into the Sea of Mysteries, also known as the Black Sea. It is the largest inland body of water in the world, bigger than the entire state of California. It has dozens of lost ships and some secret underwater tunnels. And some people believe it's an ancient quarry that was mined out in 6 stages. The Black Sea has distinct vertical layers that don't mix, with higher and lower salinity. The salty water comes from the Mediterranean, and fresh water comes from rivers. 10 of the largest rivers in Europe flow into the Black Sea. It receives more fresh water from the rivers and rainfall than it loses from evaporation. The extra water flows through the Bosphorus into the Marmara Sea. There are 2 flows going through the straits. The upper flow leaves the Black Sea and takes surface water out of it. The bottom flow carries salt water from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. That's why the upper layers of the Black Sea are less dense than its saltier lower layers. The oxygen that comes from the atmosphere and photosynthesis stays in the surface layers. Everything deeper than about 300 feet in the middle and up to 500 feet near the edge is not fit for life. Only certain bacteria can survive in these conditions. Although there's no air deep down in the Black Sea, the upper layer is home to around 750 species of phytoplankton. Eggs and larvae of fish and invertebrates chill in coastal regions. There are also 180 fish species in the Black Sea, and some of them are valuable, such as horse mackerel, spiny dogfish, and sprat. The water level in the Black Sea is always the same because there are no high or low tides, so the sea is always calm, quiet, and serene on the surface. But it has one surprise feature: an underwater river. It's a current of salty water flowing through the Bosphorus Strait and along the seabed. This amazing discovery was made by scientists from the University of Leeds and was announced in 2010. It's the first undersea river of its kind ever found. The river forms because salty water from the Mediterranean Sea spills through the Bosphorus Strait into the Black Sea, where the water is much less salty. The no-air zone of the sea is an ideal conservation chamber for what's hiding on its bottom. The Black Sea is like a treasure trove for shipwrecks, and we discovered it by accident. Some maritime archaeologists were studying sea levels to see how quickly the water levels rose after the last ice age, and they ran across over 40 previously unknown shipwrecks as a complete bonus. Researchers used 2 remotely operated vehicles to explore the seafloor and the wrecks. Thanks to it, we have a video and detailed 3D images of the ships that were stitched together from thousands of high-resolution photos. According to the New York Times, some of the standout discoveries among the 44 ships found include a medieval training vessel from the 13th or 14th century. Expedition members nicknamed another ship from the Ottoman Empire the Flower of the Black Sea for its beautiful petal carvings. The team also noticed unusual details on other ships, like coiled ropes, chisel marks, rudders, and other carvings. So far, they haven't announced any plans to excavate the shipwrecks, but the ships might be filled with historical treasures like books, parchments, and documents. It's worth a try to rescue them. The most extraordinary discovery in the Black Sea is what archaeologists believe to be the world's oldest intact shipwreck. It has been lying undisturbed for over 2,400 years. This ancient Greek vessel, 75 feet long, was found with its mast, rudders, and rowing benches all still in place, over a mile beneath the surface. Researchers believe the ship was a trading vessel, like those depicted on ancient Greek pottery, such as the Siren vase in the British Museum. This vase, or vase, dating from the same period, shows a vessel carrying Odysseus past the Sirens. The team took a small piece for carbon dating, and the results confirmed it as the oldest intact shipwreck known to humankind. The fact that it's so elaborate and well-preserved deserves a standing ovation for shipbuilders of the ancient world. Without microbes, worms, or other creatures to eat away the wrecks, it's no wonder the ships are in almost perfect condition. If the Titanic had sunk in these waters, we would have found it in a much better state now, not being eaten by nasty underwater microorganisms. Now, there's an interesting theory called the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, which suggests a huge flood happened around 7,500 years ago. 2 geologists in the 1990s suggested that at the end of the last ice age, when the Earth's climate was heating up, ice sheets were melting and sea levels were rising. The Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake. It was separated from the Mediterranean Sea by a natural dam at the Bosphorus Strait. As global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean overflowed into the Black Sea basin. They suggest the sea level rose by 6 inches every day, flooded coastal settlements, and changed the environment for good. Samples from the Black Sea floor show a sudden shift from freshwater to marine species around that time, which means there was a rapid influx of salt water. Underwater surveys have also found what look like the old shorelines and human-made structures. So, people were living in areas now submerged by the Black Sea. Plus, the timing of this flood matches up with known patterns of human migration into Europe, Asia, and Africa. They also say this flood could be the terrible flood from the story of Noah's Ark. Critics of the deluge theory say the evidence isn't as straightforward as it seems. Some think the transition from freshwater to saltwater in the Black Sea was more gradual than one sudden flood. They're also debating if people left the settlements before they went underwater or as a result. An old chronicle that's been around for about a century says there were two underground tunnels starting in what is now Romania and Bulgaria and stretching all the way under the Black Sea to Turkey. Back in the day, peasants used these tunnels to move their flocks of sheep to the Ottoman Empire and countries on the Asia Minor Peninsula. Who built these tunnels and why they run under the sea is a complete mystery. At some point, the entrances to these tunnels were sealed off for national security and were under tight guard. The security forces knew all about these massive tunnels and kept them off limits. In the 1980s, a group of people working on the Danube-Black Sea Canal accidentally found another entrance to these mysterious tunnels. This one was in a cemetery in a town of Romania. Canal workers used it to regularly cross over into Bulgaria. One more cool thing about these two tunnels is that some people think they were built thousands of years ago. If you ever try to dig a tunnel under the sea, you'll know how tricky it is even now with all the tech we have. So if the tunnels are really that old, whoever built them was super advanced for their time. Now, there's an urban legend that says that the Black Sea has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle. Fishers describe some wild whirlpool that appears out of nowhere and drags entire flocks of birds, ships, and even small islands under the sea. And once, things got even wilder with a ship that vanished under weird conditions in 1944. It was during daylight, and some black fog with green flashing sparkles suddenly surrounded the vessel. No one has ever seen it since, and no one knows for sure if the story is true. But it sure adds a spooky touch to the mysteries of the Black Sea.
The last time this volcano erupted was about 500 years ago, but recently, small tremors have grown really frequent, to such an extent that scientists have been recording more than 1,000 a month. I'm talking about the Campi Flegrei supervolcano in Italy. At one point, just a few weeks ago, the area was rattled by a 4.4 magnitude earthquake with 150 tremors in just one night. It was the strongest earthquake in over 40 years. A lot of locals spent the night in their cars, but in the morning, the shakes were followed by another earthquake, a bit weaker with a magnitude of 3.6. So, is Italy in danger? Well, the quake itself wasn't big enough to cause serious damage, but it evoked a lot of panic. At the moment, local authorities are working on grandiose emergency plans. If worse comes to worse, they'll have to evacuate hundreds of thousands of people. One of the reasons is the proximity of this area to Naples with more than 3 million inhabitants. At the moment, they're even considering an option of paying people to leave their homes. Right now, schools remain closed in the Campi Flegrei area. The authorities are allocating more than 500 million euros to ensure the safety of buildings and constructions in the area. A yellow alert is still in place in the region where 80,000 people live. There's the so-called red zone, which is the most dangerous area. There are 1,250 houses in this red zone, and all of them will be at high seismic risk if an eruption begins. Plus, more than twice as many will be at medium risk. Italy is a country prone to seismic activity, and Pozzuoli is a densely populated area that is located on one of the most dangerous supervolcanoes in Europe. Campi Flegrei has 24 hidden underground craters and dwarfs the better-known Vesuvius. Yes, the very volcano that wiped the ancient Roman city of Pompeii off the face of the earth in 79 CE. This city thrived near the base of Mount Vesuvius at the Bay of Naples. In the time of the early Roman Empire, 20,000 people lived in Pompeii. They were merchants, manufacturers, farmers, and others. The soil in the region was rich and fertile, so there were lots of orchards and vineyards. Strangely, no one knew that this black earth was the legacy of an earlier eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The area was a favorite summer destination for rich Romans. Sadly, at noon on August 24, 79 CE, all this prosperity came to an end. The peak of Mount Vesuvius exploded, sending a 10-mile-high mushroom cloud of ash and pumice into the stratosphere. For the next 12 hours, the eruption was wreaking havoc on the city. Volcanic ash and a hail of pumice stones, some of which were 3 inches in diameter, showered Pompeii. It forced the city's occupants to flee in terror. Around 2,000 people holed up in stone structures and cellars, paralyzed by fear. They hoped to wait out the eruption. Who knows? Maybe if they had decided to leave the city immediately after the beginning of the eruption, they would have had some chances to survive. A westerly wind protected the city from the first stages of the eruption. But soon, a giant cloud of hot ash and gas rushed down the western slope of Vesuvius. It engulfed the city, burning everything in its way. This disastrous cloud was followed by a flood of volcanic mud and rock, which completely buried the city. As if the volcano was making sure no one would survive, a cloud of toxic gas poured onto the city, finishing the lives of a few survivors on August 25th. A flow of rock and ash followed. It collapsed roofs and walls and turned the city into a giant cemetery. When a supervolcano erupts, the consequences are usually catastrophic. Supervolcanoes have at least once had an eruption with a volcanic explosivity index of 8, which is the largest recorded number on the index. Supervolcanoes are often extremely large, with no cone at all. That's because they're typically the remains of gigantic magma chambers that once flared up, leaving behind a caldera. They're usually located over hotspots and appear when huge volumes of magma are trying to escape from deep underground. Eventually, they burst through Earth's surface. Sometimes, all this magma gets stuck, unable to break through the planet's crust. And then, massive pools of pressurized magma gather at a depth of several miles. The pressure keeps growing because more and more magma is trying to get to the surface. At one point, a super eruption goes off. The most recent super eruption happened in New Zealand. Well, when I say recent, I meant around 26,500 years ago. That's when a supervolcano beneath the surface of Lake Taupo spewed into the air more than 300 cubic miles of ash and pumice. Imagine 500,000 Great Pyramids of Giza flying up into the air at the same time. That's how incredibly powerful that eruption was. But the most exciting and confusing thing about the eruption was that the Taupo volcano didn't simply go off like many others. At first, everything was going as usual. Tons and tons of pressurized magma had built up under the surface, and the pressure was getting higher and higher. But after the rock cracked and the first portion of lava rushed out of the crater, something went wrong, and the supervolcano took a break. Only several months later, the disastrous eruption shook the ground. Thousands of tons of lava, rocks, and ash flew high into the atmosphere. The unusual pattern of Taupo still confuses scientists. The Indonesian eruption at Toba caldera 75,000 years ago was the largest eruption in the last 2 million years. Experts estimate that the eruption could have released hundreds of thousands of tons of sulfuric acid, which might have even caused a several-degree cooling of the planet's surface. But nowadays, the impact is hard to detect because of glaciers that covered the ground afterward. There are also several so-called supervolcanoes that haven't lived up to this name yet because they've never produced any super eruptions. For example, in 1883, Indonesian volcano Krakatoa went off. The power of the eruption tore the volcano's walls open, and cold seawater rushed into its molten insides. The difference in temperatures made the volcano blow up with a deafening boom. It was clearly heard 3,000 miles away in Australia. It earned the blast the title of the loudest sound in history. But even though the consequences of this event were truly catastrophic, it still turned out not powerful enough to be called a super eruption. It only had a volcanic explosivity index of 6. Then, there's also Mauna Loa. It's a shield volcano, which means it won't produce explosive eruptions, but its sheer size makes this monster of a volcano extremely dangerous. At the moment, the volcano seems to be at peace with its surroundings. Research equipment doesn't show any signs of activity on Mauna Loa, but if Mauna Loa did suddenly erupt, lava flows could reach the ocean and the most populated and touristy places like Captain Cook very fast, in a matter of hours. The last time the volcano erupted, lava got as far as the outskirts of Hilo on the other side of the island. That's where the University of Hawaii is located. Luckily, people had a few weeks' warning to get ready for the disaster. Over its recorded history, Mauna Loa has been erupting pretty regularly, almost every 6 years. On the bright side, big island volcanoes including Mauna Loa aren't really very volatile. That's because they're shield volcanoes. These volcanoes got such a name because they aren't really very high and resemble a warrior's shield placed flat on the ground. Shield volcanoes are formed by very fluid lava. It travels way farther and forms much thinner flows than the lava erupted from a stratovolcano, which is conically shaped and tall, like the infamous Krakatoa in Indonesia. So, if Mauna Loa erupts, there probably won't be ash clouds or tons of debris. The most dangerous thing will be lava. Since Mauna Loa is a shield volcano, its lava is extremely fluid and voluminous, which allows it to flow far and fast. Scientists discovered something Atlantis-like near Australia. There used to be an entire continent that's now underwater. Here's what happened to it. Around 70,000 years ago, during the last ice age, there was a huge landmass called Sahul. It was located in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. This ancient supercontinent connected what we now know as Australia, New Guinea, Tasmania, and the Aru Islands into one giant piece of land. Imagine lush tropical rainforests surrounded by beautiful mountains. Sahul's tallest mountains were in the New Guinea highlands, with peaks reaching over 13,000 feet. This beautiful place was home to a variety of unique animals, most of which were pouched creatures. But back then, they weren't just koalas and kangaroos. Sahul was filled with different types of grazers, burrowers, scavengers, and predators. It was home to a huge diprotodon, a powerful hunter Thiosolio, and a horrifying Megalania, a creature that's much larger than any living lizard today. It was a unique place because the rest of the world was filled with placental animals at the time, like wolves, elephants, and humans. In Sahul, the only normal mammals were bats and rodents. But not all its parts were the same. The Timor, Arafura, and Carpentaria regions were covered by hot savanna and dry forests. It looked kinda like modern Australia, hot air deserts with scrubland, steppe, and temperate forests along the eastern coast. Back then, people were migrating all across the world. They made an incredible journey from Southeast Asia to Sahul and first arrived here from 60 to 45,000 years ago. They mostly traveled by foot and crossed the sea using bamboo rafts and simple boats. They came there from an ancient landmass called Sunda, which includes parts of Southeast Asia. They traveled across a series of islands known as Wallachia and eventually spread across Sahul. And it wasn't a small journey. Sahul was huge, around 4.1 million square miles. That's bigger than the USA or Canada. It stretched from the equator to around the southern part of New Zealand. So they arrived in what is now Australia and became Australia's first people. Scientists think that Sahul had a population of 500,000. We've discovered cave paintings that date back around 40,000 years. It's a hunting scene depicting an anoa, or miniature buffalo, facing figures of humans and animals. Researchers are trying to figure out how these early settlers moved across Sahul and where we might find archaeological evidence of their journey. To do this, they created a landscape evolution model. The simulation showed how Sahul changed between 75,000 and 35,000 years ago. It showed potential migration routes and archaeological sites. Humans likely traveled along coastlines and rivers. But how did Sahul get submerged off the coast of Australia, similar to the mythical Atlantis? During the last ice age, much of the Earth's water was locked up in large ice sheets and glaciers. The sea levels were much lower than they are today. After that, the global temperatures increased. The ice sheets melted and the sea levels rose. flooding the land bridges that once connected different parts of Sahul together. About 8,000 years ago, New Guinea separated from mainland Australia, and then, about 6,000 years ago, Tasmania did the same. We still can explore the underwater parts of Sahul thanks to new technology. Divers explore and collect samples directly from the ocean floor. Underwater drones can go to places that are too deep or dangerous for humans to explore. And with sonar mapping, scientists use sound waves to create maps of the ocean floor. It's like using an echo to see what's underwater. The sound waves bounce off the seabed and come back, helping us create a picture of what it looks like. Deep underwater, archaeologists have found stone tools and other artifacts. They also discovered fossils of animals like Diprotodon and Thylacoleo. By studying the underwater terrain of Sahul, they learned about the ancient rivers, lakes, and coastlines that existed during the Ice Age. But Sahul isn't the only underwater continent. Sahul isn't the only hidden gem of Southeast Asia. Take Sundaland, a place made up of Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and some other islands. This place was crazy huge during the Ice Age, but now almost fully underwater. Almost, but not entirely. The parts above the ocean are teeming with life. If you like birds, check this place out. It has almost a fifth of the world's bird species. You can spot colorful birds like the Java hawk eagle and the Bali starling among the lush forests. It's also a home to a fourth of Earth's fish species. Sundaland's waters are a haven for marine life, even the most exotic animals like the Asian arowanas. It's also a treasure trove of flowers. That's where you can find Rafflesia and Titan arum, the world's largest flowers. This makes it very similar to Zealandia. Zealandia is a long, narrow piece of land about half the size of Australia. It broke from Antarctica about 100 million years ago. Just like Sundaland, it isn't fully underwater. 7% of it stayed above sea level. This sticking out little piece is what we now call New Zealand, along with Stewart Island and some smaller islands. These pieces of Zealandia are lush and warm. They're packed with volcanoes, mountain ranges, beautiful natural geysers, and hot springs. Local people, Maori, use these hot springs for cooking. People place corn, eggs, and vegetables in baskets and lower them directly in the hot springs. Sometimes they cook food in a pit oven using heated rocks. Another hidden world is known as Argoland. This mysterious landmass was once part of Australia, back when dinosaurs chilled around. It drove scientists crazy for decades. They knew it existed because it left a huge stretch on the ancient seafloor, the Argo Abyssal Plain. About 155 million years ago, it broke off from Australia, saying bye-bye. The continent drifted somewhere north, and when it reached Southeast Asia, it just vanished. Scientists had no idea where it went, but recently they finally found its remains. Turns out, poor Argoland's lower parts started drowning into the Sunda Trench, a horrifyingly deep oceanic pit. The Earth's crust sunk into the mantle. Meanwhile, the upper parts of Argoland were pushed upward, grabbing the younger rocks on land. Because of this, Argoland broke apart into a bunch of smaller pieces. These pieces formed parts of Borneo, Java, Sulawesi, and other regions. The remains are buried under Indonesia and Myanmar. Imagine a colossal landmass the size of Greenland, Greater Adria. Its journey began about 240 million years ago when it broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana. It started moving north, and after 100 million years of enjoying the warm seas, it suddenly crashed into Europe and shattered into pieces. Most of these pieces went deep into the Earth's mantle, but some were scraped off and became part of mountain ranges like the Alps. Today, the remnants of Greater Adria are scattered across more than 30 countries, from Spain to Iran. That's why they're hard to look for. Seychelles was also once part of Gondwana. Yep, these idyllic islands are sitting atop of the ancient continent. We know a lot about it because of its fascinating granite outcrops. 100 years ago, Alfred Wegener discovered continental drift, but no one believed him. These granite outcrops helped him prove that he's not crazy and that tectonic plates really are moving. The Seychelles broke off from India and Madagascar and eventually became a sad loner in the Indian Ocean. This probably happened because of some insanely active volcanoes in the Deccan Traps. But now, the islands are home to unique species both on land and in the coral reefs nearby. Mauritia broke off from India after the dinosaur wiping. Along its journey, it stretched into a long ribbon-like shape and also broke into pieces. Now it's all scattered beneath the Indian Ocean. Scientists stumbled upon this lost land by studying tiny ancient crystals called zircons. These zircons are like time capsules. They date back an astonishing 660 million to 2 billion years. That's even older than Mauritius itself. These ancient crystals hinted that there's another Atlantis somewhere nearby. Turns out there are hidden continents all around the world, and maybe we'll discover more of them in the future.
So Venus and Earth are so different that a foolish question like, what's longer, a day or a year, that makes absolutely no sense on Earth, totally makes sense on Venus. A day on Venus is indeed longer than a year. If we put it into Earth's perspective, a day on Venus would equal 243 Earth days, while a year would only last 225 days. So it's like your birthday is every day. Venus is often nicknamed Earth's evil twin. Their differences are so stark, you'd think they're from different galaxies altogether. Just to give you an idea of how far apart they are, if the day-to-year ratio wasn't enough, the Earth rises in the west on Venus but sets in the east. These days, one of the very few similarities between these two is their size. But try to imagine a time when Venus and Earth were like peas in a pod, besties since the beginning of the solar system. Venus used to be the life of the party. NASA scientists think Venus might have even hosted a liquid water ocean and surface temperatures that could have welcomed life for up to 2 billion years. But modern-day Venus is a different story. We're talking extreme temperatures and a thick carbon dioxide atmosphere. So, what led to this cosmic makeover? Size, location, and attitude. I mean that the distance from the Sun and internal heat played a huge role in shaping Venus and Earth's destinies. By the way, there used to be 3 siblings that could have hosted life: Venus, Earth, and Mars. Now imagine 3 cupcakes in an oven. Once they were fully baked, they were taken out of the oven. One of them was put in front of an open window in the middle of winter. Another was carefully placed on a table and covered with a nice clean kitchen towel. And the last one was accidentally forgotten and left in the oven. Oops. Mars, Earth, and Venus are like those cupcakes. Mars got too cold and not welcoming. Earth is still nice and warm and well protected from all the unpleasant things, just like the towel protects that lucky cupcake. And Venus got scorching hot and impossible to consume. In terms of development, Earth took the slow and steady route, maintaining its oceans, stable atmosphere, and biodiversity. Venus, on the other hand, cranked up the temperature, evaporated its oceans, and went all in with greenhouse gases. As a result, we have a planet where you'll melt faster than a snowman in July. Mars, on the contrary, will turn you into an ice popsicle within seconds. But chances are, it might have been pretty hospitable at some point. Some scientists believe that Mars used to be covered with flowing rivers and lakes and had no water shortages. Even today, Mars still has an ocean called Oceanus Borealis, or rather, the remains of what once used to be an ocean. It lost nearly all its water over time. Now, the sources of water on Mars include polar ice caps and minerals and rocks. According to estimates, only 1% of all that water evaporated, while 99% is still locked in the red planet. Ice polar caps are pretty simple to understand, as we have the same thing on Earth. But rocks containing water? Simple. There are at least 4 types of hydrous minerals on Mars. There are hydrous clays made of silicon oxygen, and the cool thing about them is that they can even contain magnesium and iron, which are sulfur-based hydrous sulfates. Now, don't you? I know you thought of the smell of rotten eggs. but it's typical of hydrogen-sulfur and not just sulfur. These minerals have water incorporated right into their chemical formulas. There's also hydrosilica, which has water locked in its formula too. Scientists have experimented with growing plants using Martian-like conditions and found success with alfalfa. Harvesting alfalfa also helped improve the growth of other crops like turnips and lettuce. While water may be available on the red planet, the air on Mars is mostly carbon dioxide. On the bright side, and the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, the Mars Oxy can produce oxygen on Mars, which could be crucial for future missions. As for energy sources on Mars, solar, wind, and geothermal energy are a few promising options. Solar power is less effective on Mars due to weaker sunlight and dust storms. But wind power and geothermal energy could serve as reliable alternatives. With these sources in place, humans could potentially sustain life on Mars. But let's get back to comparing our sibling planets. While both Mars and Earth have moons, and Mars even has 2 of them, Venus has 0, just like Mercury. Due to its proximity to the Sun and the star's gravitational pull, Mercury lacks the ability to retain its own moon. The likelihood of any moon orbiting Mercury either colliding with the planet or being drawn into the orbit of the Sun is high. That's all clear and understandable. But the absence of moons around Venus remains an unsolved puzzle for scientists. Despite Venus's scorching hot temperatures, scientists think that even today it might not be as hostile to life as we once thought. A recent MIT study found 19 amino acids surviving in a Venus-like solution for the whole month. Yep, some like it hot. Also, Rocket Lab and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology are teaming up to send an uncrewed spacecraft, Venus Life Finder, on a mission to Venus. This spacecraft will search for signs of life in the Venusian atmosphere using a special instrument called an autofluorescing nephelometer. And no, I didn't make that up. Originally set to launch in 2023, the mission is now pushed back to December 2024 with arrival at Venus in May 2025. The goal of the mission is to discover organic compounds in Venus's atmosphere, which could point to the possibility of habitable conditions in the cloud layer. The spacecraft is designed with a Photon Explorer cruise stage and a compact atmospheric probe equipped with that nephelometer thingy. The small probe will descend through the Venusian atmosphere, collecting data on cloud particles and organic compounds. In 2020, scientists made a big announcement about finding phosphine on Venus, a compound that could be linked to life. While they're still working on confirming this, using information from telescopes or even past missions, there might be evidence hidden in old NASA data received from Venus that could shed more light on the discovery. The potential presence of phosphine on Venus has stirred excitement and caution among scientists. To make sure, they need more data from telescopes or new space missions. If they find this gas, it might mean there is some form of life producing it in the planet's clouds. This discovery would be a huge step toward understanding Venus better. Some experts think that sending probes to Venus to directly detect phosphine would be the most effective way to confirm its presence. An 80s NASA mission may have already detected phosphine, but scientists back then didn't realize it. Now, this data is being re-evaluated to uncover any overlooked evidence of the presence of the gas. This could also suggest that the compound has been in Venus's atmosphere for decades, raising questions about its source. But not everyone is convinced of this interpretation, which evokes a debate among scientists about the true nature of the detected gases. Old data from other missions may also hold clues about phosphate on Venus. While new spacecraft are going to explore the planet, it's possible that the key to unlocking this mystery lies in decades-old mission records. In total, there have been 46 space missions to Venus, including some flybys where gravity lent a helping hand. The last time we successfully landed a spacecraft on Venus was way back in June 1985 as part of the Vega 2 mission. So, let's see what Venus Life Finder will discover. Our solar system is full of mysterious objects that come from, well, everywhere. In October 2017, researchers in Hawaii spotted a mysterious thing that they dubbed a muamua. This means a visitor from a faraway land in Hawaiian, or "that's a really big cow." It followed an escape orbit. It literally escaped from its planet's gravitational pull, like throwing a ball into space, never to return. This meant that this weird thing arrived from somewhere outside of our solar system. There were tons of theories about what it was, from a simple asteroid to an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Scientists even thought it was a chunk of nitrogen ice from a Pluto-like planet. Its strange shape only added to the mystery. The big changes in the light curves showed that this thing could be either elongated like a tube or more flat like a pancake. This thing was unlike anything we've seen before. Oumuamua didn't behave exactly like a comet or an asteroid. Comets are icy and form bright tails when they pass near the sun, while asteroids are basically just rocks and don't form tails. Oumuamua has no tail and doesn't release gas, like me. But it's not your average rock either. Its surface is very shiny, almost like polished metal. When it passed by the sun, it sped up, like it had a rocket on it. And it wasn't the sun's gravity that gave Oumuamua the sudden boost. Scientists aren't sure what caused it. So what in the world was that thing? After years of study, scientists now think that Oumuamua is probably a comet with frozen hydrogen on its surface. This hydrogen reacted with sunlight, speeding up the comet and changing its path. Oumuamua likely got all that hydrogen from being exposed to tons of cosmic rays for a long time. It got some nice red tint from them as well. Oumuamua was a visitor from a young, chaotic solar system where collisions and migrations happen all the time. Such systems often toss many small objects around. It might have been pushed out by a planet like Jupiter, whose gravity is so insanely strong that it can fling huge things into outer space. The same thing often happens with comets here. Oumuamua already left our solar system, although similar objects visit us sometimes, about once per year. To learn more about these mysterious guests, astronomers plan to send a probe to chase Oumuamua. We'll use Earth's and Jupiter's orbits to slingshot it fast enough to catch up with the comet. But some of the unexpected visitors stayed a bit longer. In October 2019, NASA's Hubble Space Telescope took a picture of a bluish comet trailing dust and gas. It was already in the solar system at the time, around 260 million miles away from Earth, somewhere between Mars and Jupiter. We saw the glowing dust surrounding it, but we couldn't yet see its nucleus since it's way too small. Well, small is relative here. The thing is about 3,200 feet across, which is like the length of 9 football fields. In March 2020, Hubble images showed that a small fragment of the comet broke away from the nucleus. That means that the comet is very active, unlike Oumuamua. As we observed it further, we found that the nucleus is a loose mix of ice and dust particles. Its surface is also very similar to others, with rough areas and smooth blankets of icy, dusty debris. The comet was discovered by an amateur astronomer, Gennady Borisov, so it got the name Comet 2I Borisov. Congratulations! Scientists quickly confirmed it came to us from outside our solar system. And this thing sure was an enthusiastic tourist. It traveled at a breakneck speed of about 110,000 miles per hour. That's fast enough to circle the Earth 4 times in just 1 hour. This visit was fascinating for several reasons. Most comets in our solar system come from the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud. The Kuiper Belt is a region of space beyond the orbit of Neptune. It's like a big, distant ring around the Sun, filled with many small, icy objects. All of them are ancient leftover pieces from the time when our solar system was still very young. The Oort cloud is much farther. It's like a giant bubble around the solar system, also filled with super old icy objects. Most long-period comets come from there. But where did the comet 2I Borisov come from? We still don't know for sure. Scientists say that it likely formed in another star system, which could be either younger or older than our solar system. Would be weird if there was a third option, NASA. Anyway, it might have been kicked out from its home system, just like Oumuamua. Although Comet 2I Borisov is too small to hold on to its own atmosphere, it developed a coma when it approached the Sun. Now, coma is a funny name for that beautiful glowing cloud of gas and dust that surrounds the comet's nucleus. It forms when the sun's heat causes the comet's ice to vaporize, releasing dust and gas into space. This one was friendlier than Oumuamua and gave us some more time to study it. As a result, we learned more about its cool, unique traits. For example, it had never interacted with another star. But, unfortunately, Borisov had to leave too. Now it's on a path that will take it back into interstellar space. However, there are many more visitors to come, and you might have heard of this one. The Great Comet of 1996. That's what we call the comet Hyakutake. It was also named after the astronomer who discovered it, Yuji Hyakutake. In a beautiful coincidence, it was discovered on New Year's Eve. On March 25, 1996, this thing passed by incredibly close to Earth, only about 0.1 astronomical units away, a bit farther than the Moon. It passed over the North Pole. This made it one of the closest comet encounters in 200 years. It was visible worldwide, and it looked very bright and beautiful in the sky, stretching out widely. And it didn't stay for one night only. It got more and more visible during March, becoming one of the brightest objects in the night sky by the end of the month. The comet only fully faded by the end of May. It's a long-period comet, which means it takes hundreds of years to orbit the Sun. The last time it visited was about 17,000 years ago, and now its orbital period increased to 70,000 years. But don't be upset, there are other comets that will brighten our days and nights. Besides, some space objects prefer to stay around for longer. Now, there's this asteroid with a multisyllabic name that, to pronounce, is above my pay grade. This name in Hawaiian means the mischievous one of Jupiter. Luckily, scientists had mercy on us and dubbed it BZ. Hey, speaking for all the other narrators, thank you. It's a small asteroid, only about 1.8 miles in diameter. You can guess from the name that it shares an orbit with Jupiter. But there's a cool catch. The asteroid moves in the opposite direction, which is known as a retrograde orbit. The unusual asteroid was discovered on November 2014. It orbits the Sun for about 11 years and 8 months, sometimes passing inside and outside of Jupiter's orbit. It's been this way for at least 1 million years, and it will remain so for about 1 million more. But why does it move so unusually? BZ might actually be an interstellar immigrant. Perhaps it passed by our solar system about 4.5 billion years ago, around the time when the Sun was just forming. Then it got captured by gravity, but saved its opposite orbit. Or maybe it came from the Oort cloud. Then it could get its weird orbit from the mysterious planet 9, a hypothetical planet that's believed to exist in our solar system far beyond Jupiter. In any case, this asteroid gives us more insight into the history of the solar system and how organic materials can travel to us from outer space. Now, at any given time, there are thousands of objects in our solar system that come from outer space. They stay here for different lengths of time, but sometimes we get lucky, and they end up teaching us a lot about interstellar space.